Joint Serve Prosthetics spends 43% of its total expenses for payroll. It increased its total expenses when it spent $250,000 for robotic assemblers. This changed the allocation for payroll to 38% of total expenses. What were its total expenses after purchasing the robotic assemblers? Okay, so this one's a little tricky, and they give us a hint. First, find the total expense before the purchase of robotic assemblers. But as always, we'll start by asking ourselves, what are they asking us to solve for? And that's total expenses after purchasing the robotic assemblers. So we're looking for total expense. So our total expenses after is going to be equal to, they tell us right off, whatever our total expenses before were, plus that additional $250,000. So the only difference between what they were spending before and what they are spending now is that they added on this purchase of $250,000. Now we need to use our percent of total equation. So our percent of total expenses before was equal to, remember, it's a particular expense divided by the total expense. So in this case, the particular expense they talk about is payroll. So we'll say payroll, and we're going to divide it by the total expense before. Okay, that's how they came out with that percentage. So to figure out what the percentage for payroll was, they took what they were spending on payroll and divided it on their total expenses, and that gave them a percentage of what they were paying on payroll. So we're just reverse engineering this. Now to shorten things up, I'm going to let T equal total expenses before. So total expenses before is going to be T. So the percent of total expense before was 43%, so I'm going to plug that in. So 0.43 was equal to payroll divided by, and again, I'm just going to write T. So really the only thing I've done here is plug in that 43%, and I'm just writing total expense before in shorthand. I'm just writing it as T. Okay. I'm going to rearrange this to solve for payroll, because I need a phrase that tells me what payroll is equal to. So to get payroll by itself, I need to undo this division. So I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by T. So that's going to give me that 0.43 times T is equal to payroll. Okay? So whether I write payroll or 0.43T, these are equivalent expressions. So I could, anywhere I see payroll, I could put in 0.43T. Anywhere I see 0.43T, I could put in payroll. They mean the exact same thing. Alright, so let's put that on hold for a second. And let's consider our percent of total after. Let's consider our percent of total expenses after. And that's going to be equal to payroll again. We're still considering the same expense. So payroll divided by our total expenses before, which remember I'm calling T, plus $250,000. Okay, so let's pause here shortly because you may be wondering where I got that from. I'm using the same skeleton of the equation here. So to figure out percent of total expenses before, I took payroll and divided by total expenses before. To find percent of total expense after, I still take payroll and I'm dividing it by an expression that's equivalent to total expenses after. So remember, T plus $250,000 is equal to total expenses after. Again, T plus $250,000 is equal to total expenses after. So all I've done is substituted total expenses after for T plus $250,000. You might be beginning to see here that I'm trying to limit the number of variables I'm introducing, and I'm trying to be clever about the way I arrange my equations. Okay, so again, I have let T equal total expenses before. So let's move forward here. The percent of total after was, it changed the allocation to 38%. So I write 0.38 is equal to payroll divided by, and again I've got this phrase T plus $250,000, which is equivalent to total expenses after. In fact, to help you remember that, I'm going to put it in a red box, just to help us remember that that's equivalent to total expenses after. Okay, let's keep moving here. So just like I did before, I'm going to rearrange and solve for payroll. I'm going to rearrange and solve for payroll. So I'm going to multiply both sides of the equation by what's in that red box. So T plus $250,000, multiply both sides by that. It'll cancel out on this side, and on my left-hand side, I'll get T plus $250,000. So that payroll is equal to T plus $250,000 times 0.38. So let's rewrite that. Payroll is equal to T plus $250,000 times 0.38. Okay? So whether I write payroll or whether I write T plus 250,000 times 0.38, I'm writing the same thing. Now, look what we've done here. We've created two expressions, 0.43t and 250,000 plus t times 0.38, that are equivalent. So everything in the blue box is equivalent. Whether I write payroll, whether I write 0.43t, or whether I write T.250,000 times 0.38, they're all equivalent. Which means that I can now take 0.43t, which is what's over here, and set it equal to 0.38 times T plus $250,000. I'm allowed to do that because these two boxes are equivalent, because they're both equivalent to payroll. Now that I've done that, notice that I've set up an equation that only has one variable, T. So if I solve for T, I'll be able to find my total expenses before. So let's solve. Okay, well first we need to distribute that 0.38. So I've got 0.43t is equal to 0.38t because I've distributed. And then I need to take 0.38 plus $250,000, or times $250,000, excuse me, which comes out to $95,000. Next, I subtract 0.38t from both sides of the equation, and I get 0.05t is equal to $95,000. If I divide both sides by 0.05, I find that T is equal to $1,900,000. T is equal to $1,900,000. And remember, T was equal to total expenses before. So I've just solved for T, total expenses before. Now, remember, my final goal is to solve for total expenses after. So all I have to do to find my total expenses after, I'm going to take T, which is $1,900,000. I'm going to add $250,000 because I know that that's the only difference between my old expenses and new. And I find that my total expenses after is equal to $2,150,000. So again, to do this, First I set up an equation because I knew that my total expenses after were going to just be equal to whatever I spent before plus $250,000. That was told to me from the get-go. Then I used my percent of total expenses equation, both for expenses before and expenses after, because they gave me the percentages for each. I rearranged both of these equations to solve for payroll, because remember, the amount that we're paying for payroll didn't change, but as we added a bigger budget, the percent of the budget that payroll represented shrank. So payroll, the number itself, didn't change. That key allowed me to solve for payroll in both instances in terms of t. Setting my two t equations equal to one another allowed me to solve for t, which was equal to total expenses before. Then all I had to do was add $250,000 to find my total expenses after.